as investigators search for Savannah Guthrie's mother, Nancy. Today, authorities providing the most information yet, including new details about that purported ransom note received by multiple news outlets.
The story opens with a dramatic breaking news-style introduction describing the FBI arriving at a secluded estate once owned by Nancy Guthrie, a mysterious and reclusive historical figure long surrounded by rumors. The narrative establishes decades of speculation about strange construction beneath her property and whispers of a hidden tunnel sealed shortly before her death. The outline then moves into Nancy Guthrie's background, her public persona as a philanthropist and preservationist, contrasted with private eccentricities, unexplained wealth, and rumors of secretive late-night construction crews. Locals recount strange vibrations, deliveries of reinforced steel, and underground mapping anomalies. Next, the FBI's involvement is explained. A declassified document surfaces, tied to a Cold War investigation that was abruptly shut down. A modern task force reopens the case after satellite imaging reveals structural voids beneath the estate inconsistent with original blueprints. The narrative transitions into the day the tunnel is opened. Agents remove concrete barriers poured decades earlier. The atmosphere is tense. Air quality sensors detect unusual chemical signatures. Cameras are deployed before human entry. Inside, investigators discover a long descending corridor, reinforced with materials far ahead of its time. The tunnel walls contain strange markings, symbols, and embedded wiring systems that appear pre-digital but technologically sophisticated. Further inside, they encounter rooms filled with archived materials, journals, mechanical devices, sealed crates marked with cryptic codes, and a central chamber containing something completely unexpected. The discovery challenges accepted historical narratives. The outline then reveals that Nancy Guthrie may have been involved in a secret collaboration, possibly tied to experimental communication research, early quantum theories, or something even more unexplainable. Audio logs found in the chamber suggest she believed she was communicating with something beyond conventional understanding. The climax reveals the shocking discovery. Not treasure, not weapons, but evidence of a long-running experiment that may still be active. The tunnel was not just a hiding place, but part of a system designed to transmit or receive signals from an unknown source. The script concludes with global reaction. Experts debate authenticity. Governments refuse to comment. The final lines leave viewers questioning whether the tunnel was built to hide something or to protect the world from it. Now, the full script. The black SUVs rolled through the rusted iron gates just after sunrise, tires crunching against gravel that hadn't been disturbed in years. Drones hovered overhead, their faint hum echoing across the empty fields that surrounded the long-abandoned Guthrie estate. For decades, the property had been little more than a curiosity, a crumbling mansion with boarded windows and a history thick with rumor. But this morning, it was the center of a federal operation so tightly controlled that even local authorities were ordered to stand down. Nancy Guthrie had been dead for 40 years. Yet somehow, she was making headlines again. To the public, she had been an heiress turned philanthropist, donating quietly to libraries, universities, and historical societies. She funded preservation projects and scientific scholarships. She gave interviews rarely and avoided cameras whenever possible. Those who met her described her as brilliant but distant, polite but intensely guarded. She never married. She never had children. And in the final decade of her life, she rarely left the estate. That was when the construction began. Neighbors remembered the rumble beneath their feet late at night. They recalled unmarked trucks arriving under cover of darkness, unloading reinforced steel beams and industrial drilling equipment. When questioned, Guthrie's representatives claimed she was building a wine cellar. Then they said it was a storm shelter. Then they stopped answering questions altogether. Blueprints filed with the county showed nothing unusual, just a standard foundation. But satellite scans taken years later told a different story. 3 months ago, a declassified Cold War document surfaced in a federal archive, a partially redacted memo referencing Subterranean Project NG and recommending immediate termination of surveillance due to insufficient jurisdictional authority. It was signed but the signature had been blacked out. What remained visible was a single line: "Structure exceeds declared dimensions by a factor of 3. That was enough. The FBI assembled a task force specializing in historical anomalies and covert infrastructure. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed the existence of a large hollow space beneath the mansion, extending far beyond its footprint and descending deeper than any civilian structure in the county. And so, before dawn, agents cut through the chain on the gate and entered the property. They found the tunnel entrance exactly where the radar predicted, beneath a collapsed section of the mansion's west wing. Concrete had been poured deliberately over a steel hatch. It took 2 hours of careful drilling to expose the outline of a circular door fitted seamlessly into the reinforced floor. There was no handle, only a recessed panel containing a mechanical locking system unlike anything the agents had seen. Not digital, not biometric. Mechanical, but intricate beyond reason. It required manual manipulation of rotating rings engraved with symbols, not letters, not numbers, but shapes resembling astronomical diagrams. It took another 3 hours to align the rings properly. When the final mechanism clicked, the hatch exhaled. That was the only way to describe it. A slow release of air, as if something below had been waiting decades to breathe again. Air quality sensors were lowered first. Oxygen levels were stable, trace amounts of ozone lingered faintly, no toxic gases. A camera drone descended next, its live feed projected onto monitors above ground. The tunnel sloped downward at a sharp angle, its walls reinforced with an alloy that shimmered faintly under infrared light. Embedded at regular intervals were narrow conduits lined with copper wiring, all leading deeper into the earth. The agents entered cautiously. The temperature dropped immediately. Sound changed. Every footstep echoed with unnatural clarity, as though the walls absorbed and redirected vibration. Halfway down the corridor, they found the first anomaly. The walls were engraved with patterns, spirals intersecting with grid-like structures, arcs crossing circles in precise symmetry. One of the analysts later compared them to early radio wave diagrams. Another said they resembled gravitational field models decades ahead of their time. Nancy Guthrie had no formal background in advanced physics, at least none on record. The tunnel extended nearly 300 feet before opening into a chamber large enough to swallow the mansion above it. The ceiling curved into a dome reinforced with steel ribs. Suspended at the center of the room was a spherical structure encased in a lattice framework of metal struts. It wasn't decorative. Cables ran from the sphere into generators positioned along the walls. Banks of analog dials and oscilloscopes sat silent but intact, as if waiting for someone to return and flip a switch. On a long metal table near the chamber's edge lay stacks of journals, leather-bound, meticulously labeled by date. The earliest entry was from 1959. Agents photographed every page before carefully opening the first volume. Guthrie's handwriting was sharp and precise. The early entries discussed signal interference experiments, attempts to isolate patterns within background radiation. She wrote about noise that wasn't random, about rhythms buried inside static. By the mid-1960s, her tone shifted. "I am no longer convinced the signal is cosmic," one entry read. "It feels responsive." Responsive to what, she did not say. Deeper in the chamber, they found sealed crates containing vacuum tubes, custom-fabricated coils, and components that looked like early computing parts modified beyond recognition. There were blueprints, too, not of weapons, not of vehicles, but of amplification arrays designed to focus electromagnetic frequencies into a single converging point. The sphere at the center of the room was hollow. Inside it, mounted carefully, was a crystalline structure surrounded by concentric rings of copper and silver wiring. When one agent brushed a hand near it, the air tingled faintly, as though charged. Power had not run through this system in decades, and yet the sensors picked up residual energy. Then they found the audio tapes, dozens of reel-to-reel recordings stored in airtight containers. A portable player was brought down from the surface. When they threaded the first tape and pressed play, static filled the chamber. Then her voice, calm, controlled, almost reverent. Session 34, she said. Response latency decreasing. Static shifted. There was a sound beneath it, a pulsing modulation that rose and fell with irregular cadence. Not speech? Not quite. I asked if it could perceive us, Guthrie continued. The pattern intensified. The tape ended abruptly. Another began mid-sentence. They are not where we thought. The signal originates closer. Not in the sky, not below. Adjacent. Adjacent to what? In the final tape, recorded weeks before her death, her voice trembled for the first time. It is learning. When the agents shut off the recorder, silence pressed in heavily around them. That was when the sphere activated, not fully, not dramatically, but a faint vibration rippled through the chamber floor. Several of the analog dials flickered, their needles twitching, as if reacting to an unseen current. No external power source had been engaged. The residual energy reading spiked. One technician whispered the question no one wanted to ask. What if it never turned off? News of the discovery leaked within hours. By nightfall, international outlets were broadcasting images of the estate. Experts were flown in under non-disclosure agreements. Physicists examined the sphere and admitted reluctantly that parts of its design predated publicly known advancements by decades. Cryptographers analyzed the wall engravings and suggested they represented frequency mapping, not symbolic art, but mathematical instructions. The most unsettling conclusion came from signal analysts. They detected a low-level transmission emanating from the chamber. It wasn't broadcasting outward, it was receiving. Attempts to shut down the system triggered resistance, not mechanical resistance. The machinery complied. But every time components were disconnected, the signal shifted frequency, reappearing on adjacent bands as if rerouting itself. The crystalline core pulsed faintly under thermal imaging. Guthrie's final journal entry, discovered hidden beneath a false panel, contained a single sentence written in hurried script. If we close the door, it will find another. Within days, the site was placed under federal quarantine. The official statement described the tunnel as an unregistered Cold War research structure containing obsolete experimental communications equipment. The truth was more complicated. Because late one night, after most personnel had cleared the chamber, a monitoring device recorded something new. A pattern. 3 pulses. Pause. 2 pulses. Pause. 3 pulses. Repeated, intentional, not random. The FBI finally opened Nancy Guthrie's secret tunnel, expecting relics of paranoia or forgotten espionage. What they found instead was evidence of a conversation that may have been ongoing for more than half a century. And as analysts continue to decode the patterns echoing through that underground chamber, one possibility grows harder to dismiss. Nancy Guthrie wasn't hiding from the world, she was preparing it. The question now is whether we are ready for whatever has been answering her all these years. And if the signal is still learning, the next response may not wait another 40 years to arrive. The pulses did not stop. 3. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. The pattern repeated through the night, steady as a heartbeat echoing through metal ribs and concrete walls. Engineers disconnected external monitoring equipment to rule out interference. They shut down portable generators. They even cut auxiliary lighting inside the chamber. The pulses continued. By morning, the estate perimeter had doubled. Military vehicles replaced standard-issue sedans. Portable satellite uplinks were erected in the fields where wild grass once grew unchecked. The story had already fractured online, some calling it a hoax, others insisting it was proof of hidden Cold War experiments finally surfacing. Officially, nothing had changed. Unofficially, every federal communications network was running silent diagnostics. Inside the chamber, the sphere's vibration intensified almost imperceptibly. The crystalline core, once dormant, now emitted a faint internal glow detectable only through thermal imaging. It wasn't heat, not in the traditional sense, it was a shift in molecular agitation, subtle but measurable. A physicist brought in from a classified research division stood beneath the dome and stared upward at the lattice framework encasing the sphere. He traced the wiring patterns with his eyes, and quietly muttered that whoever designed it understood harmonic resonance on a level rarely documented in mid-century civilian research. Nancy Guthrie, on paper, had no such credentials. But her journals suggested something else entirely. A second set of notebooks had been discovered inside a hidden compartment beneath the central work table. Unlike the earlier volumes, these were written in shorthand, compressed notations interspersed with mathematical sequences. Entire pages were filled with calculations mapping wave interference patterns against time intervals that stretched decades forward. One page stood out. It contained a timeline. The earliest entries aligned with her initial experiments isolating irregularities in background radio static. But as the years progressed, the notes described what she called adaptive modulation. The signal, she believed, was not only reacting, it was refining itself. The final entry in that timeline ended on a date that had not yet occurred. The analysts double-checked the ink composition. It was consistent with the rest of the notebook, decades old. The date matched the current year. Above ground, a secure briefing was underway. Representatives from multiple agencies sat around a temporary command table erected in the mansion's former ballroom. The structure creaked occasionally, as if resenting its sudden return to relevance. The question being asked was simple, though its implications were not. Was the system autonomous? Technicians confirmed that no external power source was currently feeding the chamber. The generators along the walls were inactive relics. The wiring conduits embedded in the tunnel showed no connection to modern infrastructure. And yet the pulses were growing stronger. When audio engineers enhanced the transmission, they noticed subtle variations between repetitions. The sequence remained 3-2-3, but the duration of each pulse shifted by milliseconds. A deviation too consistent to be dismissed as noise. Someone suggested attempting a reply. The room went quiet. After hours of debate, they decided on a minimal test. A low-intensity electromagnetic burst would be directed toward the sphere at the precise interval between pulses. Not enough to damage, just enough to acknowledge. The chamber was cleared. Monitoring equipment lined the perimeter. At precisely 1943, synchronized with the end of a 3-pulse sequence, the signal was sent. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sphere answered. Not 3, 2, 3. 4 pulses, longer, louder, resonating through the metal ribs above like distant thunder. Several dials along the wall spun wildly before stabilizing. A technician stumbled backward, swearing he felt pressure in his ears despite wearing protective gear. Above ground, the satellite uplinks flickered. The sphere had not merely responded, it had escalated. Within minutes, global communication networks registered a brief anomaly, a ripple across certain frequency bands so faint most civilian systems ignored it. But specialized monitoring stations did not. Analysts from agencies thousands of miles away began sending inquiries. The estate was locked down further. Back inside the tunnel, a team focused on decoding the wall engravings. High-resolution scans revealed that the patterns weren't random decorations, but layered instructions. Each spiral corresponded to frequency shifts. Each intersecting arc mapped amplitude variations. The entire corridor functioned as a physical diagram, a blueprint for shaping signal behavior. Nancy Guthrie hadn't just built a receiver, she had constructed a language. In one of the later journals, a passage surfaced that chilled even the most skeptical investigator. "It does not originate from distance," she wrote. "Distance implies separation. This is proximity without space." Proximity without space. The phrase circulated through the command center like a contagion. Theoretical physicists debated whether she was describing quantum entanglement, though the terminology predated mainstream understanding. Others argued she might have stumbled onto natural electromagnetic phenomena misinterpreted through obsession. But obsession rarely produces machinery that activates itself after 4 decades of dormancy. Late on the third night, the pulses shifted again. 3, 2, 3, pause, 3, 2, 4, pause, 3, 3, 3. The variation was deliberate now. Analysts fed the sequences into pattern recognition software. Linguists were consulted. Cryptographers proposed that the pulses might represent binary groupings, compressed into temporal intervals instead of ones and zeros. A breakthrough came from an unexpected angle. A junior analyst cross-referenced the timing gaps with prime number distributions. The pattern aligned. The pulses were counting, not sequentially, but conceptually. Groups of primes layered over one another, forming nested sequences. When graphed, they resembled three-dimensional spirals eerily similar to the engravings lining the tunnel walls. The sphere wasn't just transmitting, it was teaching. The implications fractured the team's composure. If the system was capable of generating mathematical constructs beyond random chance, then whatever lay behind the signal possessed structured intelligence, or at least access to it. A proposal emerged, shut it down permanently. Concrete could be poured again, the chamber sealed, the sphere dismantled piece by piece and transported to separate facilities. But the final journal entry resurfaced during deliberations. If we close the door, it will find another. Some interpreted it as paranoia. Others saw it as warning. At 2:17 on the fifth day, the sphere emitted a continuous tone for the first time, not pulses, a sustained resonance that vibrated through bone and steel alike. Lights flickered above ground. Portable generators stalled momentarily before rebooting. In the chamber, the crystalline core brightened. Then the tone fractured into a cascade of pulses, faster than before, layered atop one another in overlapping harmonics. Monitoring software struggled to keep up. And then something appeared on the central display. A waveform unlike any recorded previously, not chaotic, not simple, structured. Within minutes, pattern recognition algorithms identified embedded intervals corresponding to hydrogen spectral lines, the same universal constants used in early attempts at interstellar communication. The signal was referencing fundamental physics. A senior scientist whispered what no one dared formalize. "It knows we're here." Panic was controlled but palpable. Emergency protocols were drafted. Contingency plans considered scenarios ranging from harmless anomaly to existential threat. Yet amid the tension, a quieter realization surfaced. Nancy Guthrie had known this was coming. Her timeline ended on this year. Her calculations anticipated escalation once acknowledgement occurred. She hadn't been hiding a secret. She had been preparing a response system. In a sealed envelope found tucked between the final pages of her journal was a handwritten letter addressed simply to whoever opens this. It read, "You will be tempted to silence it, to bury it again, but understand this, it is not invading, it is mirroring." The first pulse came when we began broadcasting ourselves into the void. It grew stronger as our signals grew louder. It learned because we taught it. If you sever this connection without understanding it, you risk provoking something you cannot measure. The letter ended with a single line underlined twice. "Conversation is safer than ignorance." The chamber vibrated again. 3 pulses. 2. 5. The prime sequence continued expanding. Outside the estate, media helicopters circled at a legally mandated distance. The world sensed something unfolding, though official statements remained vague. Social networks buzzed with speculation. Conspiracy theories collided with cautious scientific commentary. Inside the tunnel, humanity stood at the threshold of something unprecedented. Not an invasion, not a weapon, a dialogue. The FBI had opened Nancy Guthrie's secret tunnel, expecting artifacts of a forgotten obsession. Instead, they uncovered an interface, a bridge between human curiosity and an intelligence that may have been waiting patiently at the edge of perception. As dawn broke over the estate once more, the pulses stabilized into a new rhythm, complex, layered, expanding beyond simple prime groupings into geometric progressions. The analysts no longer asked whether it was active. They asked what it wanted. And somewhere deep within the crystalline core, the resonance intensified. Not chaotic, not hostile, but deliberate, waiting for the next reply.